Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of What the Forensics. My name is Journey, and I am joined here today by the lovely Nicole and Rebecca. This week, Rebecca will be telling us all about the case of the Mad Bomber, which I'm really excited about. I put his picture up on our slides, and his face is haunting. Like, his eyes are so piercing, so I'm excited to learn a little bit more of the personality behind those eyes. With that being said, we have some housekeeping for you guys. We would love it if you could leave us reviews and or comments when you're watching. Make sure your apps are auto-downloading so you don't miss an episode. And like, subscribe, and follow us wherever you can so that we can keep producing content for you. Also, there is no listener's discretion advised because, spoiler, he didn't kill anyone, which is wild because his title is literally The Mad Bomber. So with that, I will pass it over to Rebecca.
All right, thank you. So just a slight apology in advance. I am sick, so if I sound a little like nasally or sniffly, bear with me. And we briefly covered this episode when we discussed criminal profiling a couple, I think it was episode 65, I want to say. It was with the Atlantic Child Killers. So if you want to hear a little more about the criminal profiling that was used to apprehend the Mad Bomber, definitely go check out that episode too. But with that being said, I'll get started. On November 16th, 1940, a man coming in to work his routine shift at the Consolidated Edison power plant in Manhattan, New York, noticed a strange object on the building's windowsill. When he went to investigate, upon closer look, he immediately called the police as he had just discovered a pipe bomb. This bomb was made out of a brass pipe. It was filled with gunpowder and had an ignition mechanism in it, so whatever made it go boom, that consisted of sugar and flashlight batteries, which I thought was interesting because I did not know you could make bombs out of sugar.
Yeah, that seems like an interesting accelerant, maybe?
Honestly, it's concerning how many household items can be used to make deadly weapons.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so don't try to make bombs out of sugar and flashlight batteries. But the bomb was found inside of a wooden toolbox on the windowsill of this Consolidated Edison building. And just for ease, because that's a really long title, instead of calling it Consolidated Edison from now on, I'm just going to call it Con Ed, just shorten it up a little bit. So luckily, the bomb was found before it was able to detonate and hurt anyone, but some investigators were actually questioning whether the bomb was ever intended to detonate at all, or just kind of act as a message to someone, because wrapped around the brass pipe that contained a letter that was short and straight to the point. It was written in capital blocky letters, and the letter read, "Con Edison Crooks, this is for you." And it was signed with the initials FP.
When you say blocky letters, was it like the old school print cutting out of magazine letters, or was it just handwritten uppercase, do you know?
I was trying to figure that out. I think most of his letters were just like really blocky handwriting. But when I was trying to find pictures of the letters, there was a couple pictures that were like the old newspaper cutting. So I don't know if those are just people like dramatizing it for their story or if it was really that. But I know he definitely hand wrote a lot of the letters.
Okay.
So yeah, Con Edison Crooks, this is for you. And it was signed with the initials FP. So even though finding a credible bomb threat is very concerning, it didn't really make any headlines or anything, and the public was kept unaware of the situation just because, you know, like, why cause panic if no one was hurt? And at the moment, this seems like an isolated incident. So police did still initially investigate the incident because, you know, bomb threats are a serious thing. But they ended up dropping the case because the list of suspects that they had on the case all turned out to be clean, and they just really had no more leads to know where to go with this. Basically, an entire year later, sometime in 1941, another bomb was discovered. But between that time, there was no bombs. It was totally normal. So the Con Ed bomb did definitely just look like a one-off. But sometime in September 41, just a few street blocks away from the headquarters of Con Ed, there was another bomb discovered, also not detonated. And it was noted that this bomb was really similar to the first one. It was very similar in that it was made of sugar and it didn't detonate and was found in or near a Con Ed building. Police kind of speculated, like based on like its location, that maybe police were approaching or getting close to him as he was carrying the bomb, so he dropped it and ran, sort of like to not get caught. But this wasn't confirmed. They did an investigation for this one as well, but just like the first investigation the year prior, they just didn't have enough evidence or any conclusive leads, and they just dropped this case.
I have a question. So with the sugar, do we think that it's actually something that could ignite the bomb, or was he putting it in there because it couldn't ignite the bomb, but it still had like the threat of a bomb?
I feel like the glucose, would glucose do anything? I feel like glucose could be used in the sugar.
Yeah, so I'm not positive how sugar works as a like ignition mechanism, but it was confirmed that some of his later bombs that did detonate also used the sugar and like battery mixture. So somehow it did definitely work. They just didn't go off for one reason or another.
Okay. Sick.
So it can be used as an oxidizer in explosive mixtures, apparently. But sugar can't be made to explode by itself.
That's good.
Just from a blog post. Just a quick search.
Okay, good to know.
So, yeah, it's so weird. I wouldn't have thought of sugar for that, but oh well.
No.
So this second bomb was found in September of 1941. And then on December 7th of 1941, this feels like it's coming out of the blue, but bear with me. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor got attacked by Japanese forces. And this led, obviously, as we know, to the USA joining the fight in World War II against the Nazis. And obviously, because, you know, the United States has just been attacked, this unknown bomber who unsuccessfully planted 2 bombs near Con Ed was not initially on the top of the police's mind. However, a few days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, one of the New York police stations actually received a strange letter, once again written in that blocky capital writing that they had seen a year prior. And the note said, quote, "I will make no more bomb units for the duration of the war. My patriotic feelings have made me decide this. Later, I will bring the Con Ed to justice. They will pay for their dastardly deeds. FP." Unquote.
So, at least he recognizes the importance of being a patriot during wartime.
Yeah, this guy's like, you know what? My country's already under too much turmoil. I gotta take a break.
Let me not add to this.
And as this letter had stated, New York didn't experience any bombings, or at least no bombings like by this individual, throughout the remaining duration of the war. And I'm sure the police may have been a bit on edge after the war, because even though World War II ended in 1945, it wasn't until 1950 that the bombings started up again.
Ooh.
So they had a good 5-year period of just like, when is this going to happen? Is it going to happen?
What do you guys think would be worse? Having that 5-year period of being like, is something going to happen, or something just happening and you dealing with it?
I think the anticipation would be worse.
Yeah.
I think so too, but at the same time, like, what if no bombs ever happened? Would we always?
That's true.
It's hard to say.
That's true.
Yeah, like
I feel like I'd be on the edge of my seat too often. The 5 years, because then you're kind of like always looking for something. Whereas, yes, it'd be tragic if a bomb went off, but it could just be one of those like threats where no bomb actually goes off, and then you just deal with that after the fact.
I feel like the anticipation of not knowing would drive people to like insanity, because you're always like looking around the corner and like, what's next? When's the next shoe gonna drop? And you just can never relax.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I can't imagine that being a very settling time for the New York Police Department. And I'm sure that's probably why like they had a period where they weren't they weren't alerting newspapers about this because they really didn't want this getting big because they simply had no idea who was bombing the city. Even though there was no bombs found between 1941 and 1950, that didn't stop the Mad Bomber from still sending countless postcards and letters to various police stations, newspapers, even private New York citizens, like all over New York City. And also, of course, sending postcards and letters to Con Ed because they are seemingly who he was targeting. So I couldn't seem to find a lot of information about like the specifics that were written in these letters. But as you can imagine, they were threatening in nature. And a lot of them were very much like, we need to deal with the injustice that Con Ed has caused. And man's got a big problem with the electric company.
Yep. I do remember us talking about that. As soon as you said Con Ed, I was like, yes, it's all coming back to me now.
Yeah, and that's exactly how I felt as soon as I read Con Ed. I was like, why do I know that name?
Yeah.
How many people have vengeance against them?
Yeah.
So World War II, as I said, as we all know, ended in 1945. So I'm sure there was quite some tension amongst the police when the bombings didn't seem to continue like the bomber had said. But as we now know, and as I'm kind of reiterating, 6 years or 5 years after the end of World War II, the bombs would finally make a reappearance, and the bomber would keep his word that the bombings were at some point, in fact, going to continue. So on March 29th of 1950, it was discovered that the Mad Bomber was back in action as an undetonated bomb was once again discovered, this time inside Grand Central Station in New York. All of this is in New York, so I'm going to stop saying that.
Do we know? At this point, has he been labeled the Mad Bomber, or are we just calling him the Mad Bomber because we know him as the Mad Bomber after the fact? Like, has he been?
So, yeah, okay. Right now he's just known as the Mad Bomber, or that's what I'm calling him, just because that's how we know him.
Okay.
But the moniker Mad Bomber didn't actually come out until, I want to say, like a year or so before his capture. Like it wasn't until the newspapers started like regularly reporting on these bombings that people kind of dubbed him the Mad Bomber.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So luckily, just like the first two bombs, this one found in Central Station did not explode. However, just around a month later, a fourth bomb was discovered, and this time it was discovered because it had in fact detonated. This time in a phone booth in the New York Public Library.
Oh,
and
not the library.
Not positive. I know. Why target them? And then soon after that, although I couldn't find the specific timeline, 2 more bombs exploded. These 2, one of them again was in Grand Central Station, and again the other was in the New York Public Library. And interestingly, despite these being very public places, there were no injuries reported from these explosions.
Well, it's good.
Yeah, he's just really making a point right now, it seems.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, we may learn this, but is that intentional that there are no victims, or he's just kind of setting them off to set them off, and whatever happens, happens?
Yeah, I think to a degree it's both, but we'll get into that a little bit later, with his motive and stuff. But yeah, at the time of the bombings, police, as I had said earlier, were kind of trying to downplay it, possibly because they didn't want to worry the public about these bombings, because the police really had no leads on potential perpetrators. Like, they've already been investigating these bombings. They've been looking up on suspects that might have grudges against Con Ed. I don't think it was at this point, but at some point throughout the 16 years that this was occurring, Con Ed also put together their own investigation task force who went through basically like all of their internal files to see if they can find any employees or past employees that might have had grudges for one reason or another.
Wow.
Even though, like I said, the police were kind of downplaying it, such as, for example, they had stated at one point that the bombs were just the work of, quote, boys or pranksters.
Of course. And
I know.
Boys will be boys.
Boys will be boys. Boys will just bomb the library for fun. So yeah, probably largely because like the first couple didn't detonate, and then the last couple did detonate, but they didn't hurt anybody. These incidences barely made it into the newspaper, with, I think, the fourth bombing did get a small write-up, but it was only about 3 paragraphs long, and it was on page 24 of the New York Times at the very bottom. So it wasn't really on anyone's mind at this point. So once again, police are conducting investigations in an attempt to catch the bomber, but they always ended up empty-handed. They had already suspected, like, this was kind of an ongoing theory that they had, that it was someone who had a personal vendetta against Con Ed, just given the previous notes that were directly threatening the company. And probably because everything was hidden behind paywalls, but I couldn't find a lot of information about, like, timeline of, like, which bombs contained letters, when was he sending letters without bombs, so and so. But it was known that he, like, frequently attached letters to his bombs, like, to be found, and was still frequently sending letters to, like, the newspaper and to the police and to Con Ed, all basically threatening Con Ed and saying, like, this is what they did to me, until you, like, I get justice against them, the bombings are going to continue, is basically what he was sending throughout these 16 years. So also occurring in 1951, a bomb exploded in a phone booth at Con Ed HQ, and the company had also received an undetonated bomb through the mail around the same time. Side note, how do you successfully send a bomb through the mail? But I guess that's what the anthrax stuff was also about.
And the Unabomber, no?
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, yeah, and the Unabomber.
But this is like years before.
Yeah, this is the 50s, when I guess people weren't too concerned about mail bombings as we are now.
Yeah, I feel like as, like, whatever ignition source he had wasn't one that could be triggered by, like, jostling it. It had to be, like, a very, like, specific, or, like, I don't know the word, like, that I'm thinking of. Yeah, an intentional ignition, I guess.
Yeah. So as I was saying, like, about the letters and stuff that he was sending, an interesting pattern began to occur with them, in which not only was the bomber sending letters to, like, threaten Con Ed or sending them to the police, but he was also occasionally sending letters to, like, the building or the businesses that he's hidden the bomb inside to tell them that there was a bomb inside their building. He wouldn't tell them where the bomb was, but he basically was just like, hey, just a heads up, bomb might explode.
He loves just messing with people.
It's the suspense. Yeah. The suspense.
Yeah, I can totally see how, like, this could cause mass panic in New York City.
Yeah, especially if you don't know, like, the bomb's not going to explode. Like, there's a bomb in your building. Cool, where is it? I have no idea. Is it going to explode? Also, no idea.
No idea. Yeah.
That's so scary.
Oh, God. Yeah, no thank you. But with these ones that said, like, there's a bomb in your building, obviously some of these also contained threats about Con Ed. There was one note that I did find a transcript of. It was received by the New York Herald Tribune, so that's who it was addressed to, on October 22nd, 1951. And the note read, "Bombs will continue until the Consolidated Edison Company is brought to justice for their dastardly acts against me. I have exhausted all other means. I intend with bombs to cause others to cry out for justice for me."
Okay.
So basically, he's doing this as, like, a cry for help. Like, if I can't get their attention, maybe someone else will help me get their attention.
Do you ever address why he's so mad at Con Ed? I know we talked about it in the other episode, but I don't remember.
Yeah, that's totally fair. No, I do mention that a little bit further down.
Okay, sick.
So I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit from to, like, 1952 or 3, just because the bombings at this point are unfortunately kind of routine in the sense that they're very unpredictable, but police are pretty, like, they're looking out for it at this point. Like, they're investigating every single bomb threat because they really don't know, like, how many bombs might genuinely be hidden right now.
Yeah.
So from 1952 to 1953, there were numerous other bombs discovered. As I said, some of them exploded, some of them didn't explode, and they were hidden around various busy public areas. There was multiple bombs discovered hidden inside of the fabric leather, the fabric theater seats of movie theaters. They were found at a bus terminal, again at Grand Central Station, like really just anywhere that the public has a chance of finding it. And interestingly, despite numerous bombs being found and detonated up until this point, the first injury didn't actually occur until December of 1952, when a bomb had exploded inside a theater seat of a Lowe's theater in New York, which was just like a movie theater, like play sort of place.
Wow.
And this one, I believe, had not only, like they were still injured, but this bomb injured one person. So as I said, that would mark the first injury that these bombs actually caused. So it was at some point in 1952 that police had ended up reaching out to newspapers, because obviously by this point, numerous bombs have gone on, so newspapers are now reporting on it. And police urged newspapers to please stop reporting on these bombings, because it was very clear at this point that there wasn't an end in sight. The police weren't going to admit that they had no idea who it was. And the public was starting to get pretty nervous about these bombings, understandably. So the bombings continued throughout 1953 to 1956. And while they didn't kill anyone, they obviously still caused numerous injuries. These ranged from very small to life-threatening. And justifiably, the public was, as I said, very nervous. I kind of keep skipping around a little bit just because there was over 30 bombs, and I don't think we want to be here for an hour listing dates of bombings.
That's so many. Oh my goodness.
I know. So yeah, between 1952 and 1956, like I said, lots of bombs deployed. And I will get into like specific numbers later. I'm just kind of summarizing the timeline right now. But it was noted that these bombs were all in very similar circumstances in which they injured none or like a few people. I think the most people that got injured at once was 6 people, if I remember correctly. And the bombs were always hidden in an obscure place in a very public building, such as like inside a theater seat. One of them was found like inside a vase in a cafe in Grand Central Station. I think they said one was found under the toilet bowl in the bus terminal, like weird places.
Yeah, I would never have thought to look in any of those places. But I guess if you get a message that there's a bomb in your building, you search every single nook and cranny.
Yeah, you were looking everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. So on December 3rd of 1956, after countless bombings that are starting to really, really impact New York City, the New York Police Department Police Commissioner, Stephen, I'm not positive how he'd want it pronounced, but Stephen P. Kennedy ordered the, quote, greatest manhunt in the history of the police department. He ordered this greatest manhunt to be conducted just one day after another bomb had been detonated in a theater full of 1,500 people.
Wow.
But thankfully, again, not thankfully because they're injured, but of the 1,500 people, only 6 people were actually injured by the bomb.
Out of 1,500, though, that's a not bad ratio.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. And also, no one lost their lives, which is the most important part.
Yeah.
Throughout their 16 years of investigation at this point, police had questioned countless different suspects. They followed so many leads. They were, by this point, also now receiving false bomb threats, just basically pranksters and boys being boys, actually just trying to mess with the investigation. And many of these leads obviously were junk or didn't actually lead anywhere, because as citizens of New York got more nervous and I don't know the word I'm looking for, but as they got more on edge about this, they were basically starting to accuse anyone. Like the witch trials, they were accusing anybody that they thought behaved strangely, or that maybe they always thought were a little weird, or thought they knew a little too much about one subject. And because this was such a prioritized case, they had to investigate every single threat and every single lead. Desperate to find something at this point in the evidence indicating that maybe the criminal have slipped up has been fruitless. The Mad Bomber was very meticulous not to leave evidence behind that could identify him. And as I had said earlier, the leading theory in the investigation, and even up until this point in 1956, was that the bomber was a former Con Ed employee that held a grudge against the company. So Con Ed, at this point, was still involved. They had their own task force, and they went over like decades of documents about their employees or past employees, but like specifically focusing on documents that had to do with like grievances or like workers' compensation issues, or just specifically the complaints that employees brought up to the company.
Con Ed, you said, was a power plant, right?
Yeah, I think it was
Energy,
a power
you said?
company.
Yeah.
It's actually still in existence. They provide electric, gas, and steam to New York City and Westchester as of today.
Crazy. I also wanted to say that the way you said that like Con Ed was still a suspect, or like they had started to think that Con Ed was involved, was very funny, because I was like, yes, he's targeting Con Ed specifically. Like, it sounds like the police took forever to like figure out that Con Ed was the like main whatever. And I was like, yeah, no duh. Like, of course it's by someone who has a grudge against Con Ed. Like, why weren't we starting here?
Yeah, exactly. Like, they like, through my research, I'm reading all this stuff that's like, they had a theory that it was someone who held a grudge against Con Ed, maybe a previous employer. And I'm like, yeah, like, no shit. It's the first bombs they found had notes that were like, this is meant for you. Mm-hmm. Of course they have a grudge against them.
Yeah, exactly.
So despite the intense efforts of the police in their manhunt, they simply did not have enough evidence. They did not have, I guess, the skill set at the time to lead them to the perpetrator. And it was very clear that the current investigation techniques that they were employing were just not working. So with this in mind, at the end of 1956, the police captain, John Cronin, had approached Dr. James Brussel, who was a psychiatrist, criminologist, and assistant commissioner of the New York State Commission for Mental Hygiene. He also had experience performing counterintelligence profiling work during World War II and the Korean War for the American Army. So even though profiling, and again, listen to episode 65 if you want to learn more about profiling, because we cover it there, profiling was not used in criminal cases before this, and this was one of the, I think it was the first American case that criminal profiling was used. And so obviously they chose this guy because he's like one of the only experts in it at the time. Interestingly, Brussel actually declined to help the police at first. He had said that, I didn't put the quote directly, but paraphrasing, he basically said, you've had the entire police force working on this for a whole decade and haven't found anything. What makes you think I'm going to be of assistance in this case?
Yeah.
But because this was being widely described as the state's largest manhunt, it didn't take a lot to eventually convince him just to give it a shot. So, examining all of the known evidence from the case, like the letters, the bombs themselves, like how they were made up, and using his expertise as a psychiatrist, Brussel ended up putting together the first criminal profile, or the first one in America. Brussels, at the same time, after creating his profile, urged the police to have this published in newspapers around New York, because obviously one reason being that like the more people that see this profile, the more likely that they might catch the guy because someone might recognize it. But he also suggested that he wanted to put this in the newspaper because with the profile that he had made of the bomber, he said, if there's something in this profile that doesn't align with who he actually is, I think he's going to reach out and tell someone, which will then, again, get them closer to who he is.
That's a good theory. I had not thought of that.
Right? I didn't either. But like a lot of criminals are pretty like narcissistic people. So if you say something wrong about them, there's a chance they're going to be like, actually, no.
Yeah,
You're
that's
wrong.
so smart. Oh my goodness.
So Brussel told police, I'm just going to get into the profile. He told police that he believed that the mad bomber was, quote, a textbook paranoid schizophrenic, and that, as is common with the disorder, he was likely reclusive, antisocial, and held a lot of anger for a perceived enemy. he further stated that people that have paranoid schizophrenia, such as the Mad Bomber, would be capable of acting normal, like day to day, however, might become irrational or unstable if their delusions begin to enter their day to day life. So they might, on the outward, seem like completely mentally healthy people, but if his delusions become too extreme, people close to him may start noticing him changing, basically. So Brussel further stated, quote, "We all get mad at other people and organizations sometimes, but with most of us, the anger evaporates eventually. The paranoic's anger doesn't. Once he gets the idea that somebody's wronged him or is out to hurt him, the idea stays in his mind. This was obviously true of the Mad Bomber." It was further stated that they believed the Mad Bomber was likely in his mid-40s, but possibly older, given that most people with paranoid schizophrenia, according to him and at the time, this could be different now, don't become fully symptomatic until after the age of 35. And the Mad Bomber began his bombing spree in 1940-41. So they suspected at least over 40 based on that information. He then also stated that the Mad Bomber was likely, quote, "symmetrically built, neither fat nor skinny." And this was based on research of a psychiatrist in Germany who correlated paranoid disorders with an athletic body build.
Interesting.
Yeah, again, like, I'm not positive how accurate this is to today, but I mean, given they found him, it could be possible.
I like the idea of being symmetrically built, because where do you draw the line of symmetry? Like, is it at your waist or right down like the middle of your face? Or like,
it would have to go right,
you know,
through you top to bottom, would it not?
Yeah, but it's funny to think of it at the waist. That if you like folded him in half. Yeah,
we're all crazy. That's
odd.
The case.
It also, like, that German scientist reminds me of like the very beginning of forensics, when they're like, I don't know why I want to say his name is Alfonso. I know that's wrong. Or Albert Bertillon, when he was like, this is how this person looks, or like the size of their head, like, means that they're going to be a serial killer or whatever.
Phrenology?
Yeah, phrenology.
That's what it's called. I was trying to think of that as well, and I couldn't. But yeah, it seems like the reason I'm kind of discrediting this one part about like his build is because it kind of sounds like phrenology, and I know that's not terribly accurate. So we don't know about that one, but the rest of it seemed pretty good. Based on like the neatness of the writing and the handwritten letters, Brussel had also deduced in his profile that the Mad Bomber was, quote, "was almost certainly very neat, proper man. As an employee, he had probably been exemplary. He had turned out the highest quality work. He had shown up precisely on time for work each morning. He never was involved in brawls, drunkenness, or any other messy episodes. He had lived a model life up until the alleged injustice, whatever it was, had occurred." And then also said that this likely applied to his grooming habits as well. So he said the bomber, quote, "is probably very neat, tidy, clean shaven, and goes out of his way to seem perfectly proper. He doesn't wear any ornament, jewelry, no flashy ties or clothes, and he is quiet, polite, methodical, and prompt." So Brussel also explained that the Mad Bomber was likely suffering from an Oedipus complex, which we, again, don't really diagnose people with anymore. But it's a Freudian term, meaning he had an erotic fixation on his mother as a young boy and felt jealousy of his father as a result. I don't think we'll ever know how accurate that was, because I couldn't find anything specifically about Metesky's feelings about his parents. But Brussel had stated that this Oedipus complex would have left a lingering desire for revenge in his adult life, which Brussels had said that the Mad Bomber likely would have transplanted this jealousy and hatred onto something or someone else that had wronged him because of his paranoid schizophrenia. So this interested the police, specifically the note about the Oedipus complex and like redirecting anger, because the Mad Bomber, as they had already known, had planted his first bomb at Con Ed, who he was also sending letters to and was obviously very distraught about. So another aspect of the profile came from the way in which his letters were phrased. It said, Brussel had said, quote, there was a certain stilted tone in the letters, a total lack of slang or American colloquialisms. Somehow the letters sounded to me as though they'd been written in a foreign language and then translated into English. He then hypothesized, this one was strange. This criminal profiles don't usually go this in depth, but like Brussel knew what he was doing, apparently. And he hypothesized with the police captain what the Mad Bomber would actually be wearing at the time of his arrest. He had said, Captain, one more thing. When you catch him, and I have no doubt that you will, he will be wearing a double-breasted suit and it will be buttoned. Unquote.
I forgot about that part.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird little one. Like, I don't know. I just feel like if that didn't somehow come true, it would have like slightly discredited the profile a little more, and then maybe we wouldn't use profiling as much as today. I don't know. Just speculating.
Do you also think that was more of a general assumption back in the time too? Because if we heard that now, we'd be like, who are you going to find with a wearing that? Like, that's so
with a
obscure.
double-breasted suit. Yeah, that's
buttoned
fair.
up too, though. Buttoned up.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, back in however many years ago, though, or decades ago, is that what everyone wore, or is that what you wear office attire?
That's fair, because I feel like that actually would have been like a somewhat common attire because everyone looked fancy back then,
right?
And they did say that like he was likely a very clean shaven, a very put together man. Like, this man cared about how others perceived him. So I guess that would make sense. Like, I feel like that'd be similar to saying like, oh, when you arrest him, he's going to be wearing like a button down and slacks or something.
Yeah,
today.
Okay. That makes sense.
So just as Brussel had suggested to police, his profile was printed on the front page of the New York Times on Christmas Day, and they waited for leads. So this was like the best place to have your article posted and the best time.
Wow.
Because a lot of people obviously were still reading newspapers back then, and Christmas Day, everyone wanted their paper.
Mm-hmm.
So interestingly, the day after the profile went public, so December 26th, the New York Journal-American published an open letter addressed to the bomber, urging him to turn himself in and promising that they would work with the police to ensure that he got a fair trial, and even offered to publish his grievances toward Con Ed when all was said and done. But in response to this publication, the bomber did write back. He stated that he would not be giving himself up because Con Ed had not yet been brought to justice, but he did provide, and this was like, to me, this is kind of how you know, like, everything he's doing is very much directed at Con Ed. Like, he's not trying to hurt innocent people. So he did provide a list of all of the locations that he had planted bombs in 1956. And it was speculated he did this because there was possibly undetonated bombs that he wasn't sure whether or not the police had found, obviously because not every single one was published. Within this letter, responding to Journal-American, he had stated, quote, "My days on Earth are numbered. Most of my adult life has been spent in bed. My one consolation is that I can strike back, even from my grave, for the dastardly acts against me." Unquote. So he sounded pretty well spoken. Just a little bit crazy. Anyways, on January 18th of 1957, so this was like just under a month after the profile was posted or published, an employee who was working at Con Ed was still scouring the company's internal documents, just looking for any hints at the identity of the bomber. She was specifically searching through workers' compensation cases that involved threats or perceived threats to the company or its like higher-ups. And she came across one file that contained two keywords that she noted she had seen in previous publications of the bomber's letters in Journal-American. And these words were, quote, injustice and permanent disability. So obviously she brought this information to the police. The police took in this lead, investigated it, and this lead was on the former employee of Con Ed named George Metesky. So after basically reviewing all of the evidence, comparing it to the profile, comparing it to the letters, XYZ, on January 21st of 1957, in large part due to the profile and the work of the Con Ed employee, detectives arrested George Metesky, who they confirmed was a former Con Ed plant worker who was forced to retire early after being injured on the job and subsequently fired before he could come back to work.
Wow.
So upon arriving at Metesky's house, he opened the door and said to police, quote, "I know why you fellows are here. You think I'm the mad bomber," unquote. And when police confirmed this, like, yes, that's why we're here, they asked him, what does FP stand for? Because as we clearly know now, it's not Metesky's initials. And that's when Metesky told them that the letters FP that he signed every single letter with stood for fair play.
That's kind of a letdown.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. I thought it was going to be like this big cool thing, and then it was like, no.
Where's the fun in trying to decipher that? The
Yeah.
fair play. Just write fair play at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kind of get it with his whole, like, with the quote you read of him, like, I've been basically disabled. And so this is the fairest way, I guess, that I can get back at them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But still, I was expecting, like, something way more grand.
Yeah, way more grand, or just like, oh, that was like to intentionally confuse you sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a little tiny bit about Metesky's injury, because it's obviously relevant. It's why he started bombing the place. Metesky had been injured in an accident in 1931 when he was working at Con Ed. It was at one of Con Ed's power plants. He was exposed to a boiler explosion.
Wow.
And he did say in the interrogation with the police that this boiler explosion led to him getting tuberculosis, although I'm not positive if that was the reason for him, like, going off and staying on workers' comp, or if there was, like, additional injuries. I couldn't seem to find that information. But either way, obviously, because he was injured at work, he filed for workers' compensation, but they denied it because he didn't file his claim within appropriate time of the accident, which notably was 2 years. So, so for some reason, no idea why, he waited over 2 years to file a claim for workers' comp. And then they denied it, which kind of reasonably, if I'm honest. And then he appealed it multiple times, and each appeal was subsequently rejected. And so this led to Metesky believing that he had been done wrong by the company and that he was treated unfairly.
Okay, I have some thoughts on this. I feel like a boiler explosion wouldn't cause tuberculosis, but I don't know enough about boiler explosions and tuberculosis to say that with fact.
That's
I'm
fair.
also wondering if he waited the 2 years or whatever, like the 2+ years to file that workers' comp because his tuberculosis hadn't happened yet. Like, he waited until he got tuberculosis and was like, oh my goodness, I got that from this injury.
Is from the explosion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's
fair.
also,
that's definitely, sorry, I was going to say, that's definitely something that I should look into to clarify, because that very well could be the reason that he waited so long. I don't know. I was just being judgy and was like, well, dumb move.
That's the only thing I can think of other than him being like, no, like, I'll get to it. And then, like, 2.5 years go by and he's like, oh shit, I didn't get to it, but now I'm going to, or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, because it would surprise me as well, just because, like, without workers' compensation, like, I don't know if EI was a thing back then, but it's like, how was he making money in that time? Like, if he wasn't working, it wasn't on workers' comp.
Yeah. I also, like, I'm so curious if there were any, like, not that tuberculosis isn't a physical injury, but, like, physical injuries that happened as a result of the explosion, because I was thinking like, oh, he lost a leg and like XYZ or whatever. But it's also cool to see kind of where his what's the word I'm thinking of? Inspiration for planting bombs comes from, is because he was injured in an explosion. So now he's threatening everyone else with explosions.
I was going to say that too. And I wasn't sure if Rebecca was going to touch on it. So I was going to bring it up later. But yeah,
I did.
Yeah.
I didn't even consider that. I didn't even consider that. But that's a really good point.
Do you think the anticipation then of like planting the bombs and telling someone where they are has to do with maybe there had been claims about this boiler, whatever, being faulty to start with, and then eventually it did explode and he got injured from it. So now he's just trying to hash out that anticipation on others? I feel like I could just be grasping at straws and just creating something out of nothing, but...
Or even
I feel like there's a lot of different theories that can be said about this.
Yeah. I was thinking like even with the like, if there was a time lapse between when the explosion happened and when he got tuberculosis, like the anticipation of that. Interesting. Okay. I guess the boiler explosion can cause tuberculosis, I think, provided it's like a certain thing that explodes.
Okay. So like I don't know how boilers really work, but like I know that coal was still very heavily used back then. Coal and oil, I think. So
because there's like
a lot of people I think got tuberculosis from working in coal mines.
Oh, that would make sense because of the air quality. There was just a study done in 2011, and I can't open it for some reason, but it's titled "Exposure to Combustion of Solid Fuels and Tuberculosis."
Oh, okay. So that would make sense.
Yeah. Oh, it can take from weeks to years to develop depending on your exposure and your immune system.
Okay. So that clears it up, because I feel like that definitely could be a reason for why it took so long. So he was injured, waited 2 years, they rejected it, he appealed, they rejected it. He thinks he was treated unfairly and was done wrong. And if that is the case, it takes multiple years to possibly get tuberculosis from that, then I would agree. Maybe he was treated unfairly. But anyways, it was found that Metesky did meet many of the aspects of this profile. He was a middle-aged man. He was of average build with a history of workplace problems. And I know I'm just totally glossing over this point, but previously we had said he might be from like a German or other European country based on how he writes. And it was confirmed that he immigrated here with his parents at a young age from Lithuania. So he was actually initially raised overseas in Europe before coming to America. He had never been in a relationship. He kept a very, very neat bedroom. And even though when they opened the door to arrest Metesky, he was in his pajamas, they gave him a chance to go and get dressed before taking him into the jail or into the station. And sure enough, when he came out of his bedroom, he was wearing a double-breasted blue suit.
Damn. Do you think all the cops started laughing? They're like,
I hope so, but I also feel like that wouldn't have been
gone
good.
over well.
Yeah.
I think they probably laughed about it later on.
Later on.
Yeah,
true.
What are the chances?
But he was right with the profile.
Right? I also wonder if, like, they didn't post, like, when they posted the profile of who they think the Mad Bomber was, they didn't add that he would be wearing this double-breasted blue suit, because then he could have just read it and been like, haha, I'm going to mess with them.
I'll do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they didn't do that. I think that was just like an aside to the captain from Brussel. So following Metesky's arrest, he was interrogated, during which he didn't really need to be interrogated per se, because he was very forthcoming and provided a full, detailed confession of his crimes.
Wow.
During the investigation, police basically gave him like a list of the 32 bombs they had found. I never mentioned that before. Police found 32 bombs.
Wow.
That's a lot of bombs.
Wow. That is a lot of bombs.
So yeah, they gave him this list to basically say, like, did you not do these? And even though he would not a single time did he refer to any of them as bombs, he remembered the specific date and location of every single one that he had planted that they showed him.
Wow.
That's impressive.
And I know. And then after confessing to the 32 known bombs, he then went on to confess that he had previously, like years back, I think before he was bombing the public, he had planted a further 15 bombs at various Con Ed locations that just never got reported for like one reason or another. And that also, I guess, just didn't explode.
Ooh,
do you think
so
they were all found? Or do you think there's some just throughout the Con Ed buildings now hidden away, nooks and crannies?
That's what I'm wondering. Like, I genuinely think it's possible that there are some bombs just hidden because, and I didn't put this specifically in my notes, just because there was so much to this case, but it was said that there was basically like a worker or like someone doing repairs to the upholstery of some of the theater seats in one of the theaters that previously had bombs planted in it. I don't remember which one.
Mm-hmm.
And through this, like, basically some of the seats had been vandalized, so this man was tasked with going in and replacing the seats. And he found an undetonated bomb inside the seat, like, months after it was planted.
Ugh.
Oh my god. That's so scary.
Like, yeah, so, like, that's part of the reason that Metesky had, like, when he replied to the Journal that previous year, he was like, oh, by the way, in 1956, I planted this many bombs in this many locations. Like, because the police missed bombs and he knew that. Like,
wow.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so scary.
Yeah, there was again, like, I didn't put this one on there because there were so many bombs, but it also kind of made me laugh. I think it was a security guard or something. He found a bomb at wherever he was working. I think he worked at the bus terminal, but either way, he found a bomb, didn't realize it was a bomb because, like, you know, it's just like a brass tube with like things inside it.
Mm-hmm.
But he just saw it as a brass tube. He didn't think it was a bomb, and he reportedly thought, oh, this might be really useful for some plumbing job I have at home.
No.
So he took the bomb home and it detonated on his table.
No.
Oh my goodness.
It didn't injure anybody, but still.
Injured the house. That's a lot of
repair.
Yeah.
Oh man.
So I'm really intrigued how his bombs ignite. And I'm gonna Google that after and know that for my own personal self so that we're not posting that on the internet. I'm also curious, like, how big the explosions were, because not a lot of them injured. Like, if a bomb went off on my table right now, I feel like I would get injured as well as everyone else who lives in my building.
It seems like floor, a lot of his bombs were quite small. Because, like, there was one incident where it was at, I believe they said, the Rockefeller Theater, and it was in a crowd of like a bunch of people, but the bomb was hidden in a seat kind of like at the back of the theater. And because there's a show going on at the front of the stage, only the people like directly surrounding the bomb actually knew anything was going on. Like, the people at the front row didn't even hear anything.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so they basically like let the movie finish, and then the police came in and like locked down the building, and we're like, okay, leave now.
So they're just little like squeaker bombs. They're not like heavy duty, take it place down kind of thing, I guess.
Yeah, I'm thinking like building leveling kind of.
Yeah.
Like, this guy really seemed like he just, like, these bombs were just to make a point. Like, no one was listening to him when he was planting them at Con Ed. They weren't even finding them for some reason.
Yeah,
so
wild.
So my next point actually on my slides was that even though Metesky's grievances were only with Con Ed, like, he didn't have grievances with the public, with the police, with like anybody else. It was just the company that he thought wronged him. He explained that the reason he was planting bombs in public locations was because the bombs he had planted at Con Ed weren't gaining any attention. And because they weren't gaining attention, he knew Con Ed wasn't going to do anything about his case.
I may have missed this. Did any of the bombs in public, though, have something that could relate back to Con Ed? Because I feel like if the bombs are just going off in the public, why would Con Ed care?
True.
Like I said, like I couldn't find a lot of like the letters and stuff, but some of the bombs, at least of the ones that didn't detonate, because obviously if there was letters on the ones that detonated, we wouldn't know. But multiple, like numerous bombs that were set that didn't go off contained notes that said like, this is for you, Con Ed, or until Con Ed gets justice, XYZ is going to happen.
Okay.
Yeah. So he was alluding to it in like most of his letters, basically.
Okay. That makes sense. Though.
Okay.
So Metesky was ultimately indicted on 47 charges. These ranged from attempted murder to damaging a building with with explosives to endangering lives. But at the time of the indictment, which happened with a grand jury, he was actively being evaluated at the Manhattan Bellevue Hospital for basically psychiatric wellness. So on April 18th of 1957, after hearing from multiple psychiatrists and experts who were working with Metesky at the Bellevue Hospital, a judge ruled that Metesky had paranoid schizophrenia and was, quote, hopeless and incurable both mentally and physically, unquote, and found him legally insane and incompetent to stand trial, and he was ultimately committed to the Methuen Hospital for the Criminally Insane.
Wow.
Sorry, were you going to say something else?
I was just going to say that, like, at some point in this episode, I convinced myself he was sane.
Just another thing to profile got right.
Yeah.
So Metesky remained committed at this hospital until the year 1973, because it was at this point that the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that mentally ill defendants could not be committed to a hospital that was operated by the New York State Department of Correctional Services unless a jury had found that he was dangerous during trial. And because Metesky was not tried by jury trial, he ended up getting sent to a different hospital that was being operated by not the correctional services. He was basically sent there so that doctors could evaluate whether or not he actually was still harmful, because they weren't going to make him sit through a jury trial after already convicting him.
Mm-hmm.
And so after being transferred to this hospital and evaluated by different doctors, the doctors ended up deeming him harmless. And because he had already technically served, I think they had said like 2/3 of his sentence, I want to say. Like he was technically supposed to be sentenced to 25 years and he'd already spent like 15 or so years, if my math is right, in like this mental hospital. So they ultimately released him when they deemed him not dangerous. And he returned home to wherever he came from first, because I, for some reason, didn't write that down. But he died in 1994 at the age of 90 at home, and he was basically never heard from, like, after his conviction. He didn't commit any crimes from the time he was released until his death, but it was said that he continued to hold resentment towards the company. So in all, it was said that Metesky planted a confirmed 33 bombs, but of course there could have been more. And of those, 22 of them exploded, and there was a total of 15 people injured.
Wow. I'm glad no one died, though.
Bonkers.
Of all of those numbers, and there's not one death, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Like, it was honestly the best outcome that it could have been for 33 confirmed bombs.
Yeah.
Like, that's insane.
Yeah.
22 of which exploded.
Yeah.
Wow.
It does make me a little nervous knowing that he was just kind of like living life out and about and nothing had ever like happened to Con Ed, that there's still like bombs that are just going to go off.
Yeah, like I would like to think that the ones that didn't go off are probably never going to go off, but still, like, there's that what if.
Yeah,
that'd be
and
crazy
like if he had planted any after he got out.
Yeah.
Yeah, true. Because we really will never know unless we find one with a letter with that same handwriting.
I was going to say, if we ever seen the news of a bomb at Con Ed, we'll be the first to call him up.
Because he said in that one quote, like, even after I'm dead, shit will still happen. That makes me
he was like, I will get justice against Con Ed, basically whether dead or alive.
Yeah, I know that it's been like 50 years since he's been released from prison and like 30 since he's died, but it's still just a little scary.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you. I agree.
Yeah.
But that is the case. I know I didn't really get into why he was the Mad Bomber in detail, but it was just the moniker. It was such a common thing back then to be like, oh, new prolific criminal, we got to give them a catchy name.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And that's what the New York Times gave him, was the Mad Bomber. So,
and it kind of works because I told you guys this already, but as you were talking about it, I was like, hey, Mad Bomber could mean both angry and crazy. And so it fits like all facets of his life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it totally does. Like it's a double entendre. Is that what that even means? Double entendre? Mad Bomber, Mad Bomber. I don't know. But I totally, like it can be seen from both ways for sure.
Yeah, which I think is, I don't know. It's a good name. It's suiting, I guess.
Yeah.
But awesome. Okay, thank you so much for telling us all about the Mad Bomber. I have been really excited about this episode. Nicole, you said you have a forensic corner?
Yeah, it's just a quick little tidbit. I had seen on Disney that there was a new Stanford Prison Experiment documentary. And I remembered, as probably the both of you have, in psychology, that's all we kind of learned about when it came to like not only obedience and like authority and whatnot, but also just ethics around research. But October 2024, Zimbardo passed away at 91 years old.
Oh, really?
Yep. So he passed away at his home in San Francisco on October 14th of 2024.
Wild.
I have no idea why. I honestly thought he was still doing research studies.
Oh, I thought he was dead for some reason. I thought he just kind of had his moment of, decades of fame, I guess, with his research. And then we just didn't hear of him. So I was like, maybe he's not around anymore. But no, he's still kicking.
That's crazy.
Interesting. I wonder, like, how much he contributed to, like, in, like, the last decade or so.
I think that would be a whole episode conversation in general. Because, like, did he contribute? Did he not contribute? Obviously, he did in some way, but it wasn't the best way to contribute it. And so, like,
it's pretty unethical.
Yeah, those contributions still gave us information, but the information itself, the underlying concepts, can it be substantiated kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was even thinking we should do like a debunk, because that's what in the documentary on Disney, there was a researcher who kind of like debunked the prison experiment, basically going into the archives and saying this doesn't line up with what Zimbardo's been telling the public for years, for decades. But I'd be curious too, because I had seen a video on like Ivan Pavlov, like the Pavlov's dogs. That's what I meant to say. And how we all know, like, you ring a bell, the dog drools, they're going to eat. But that isn't actually how the study was conducted. So
yeah, I also read about it recently and it made me really sad. So if we want to sadden our listeners with really disturbing studies that are just shown as wholesome.
Yeah. But I think it's fascinating too, in the sense that so much of what we learn, this is a generalization, but when I was in university learning psychology, we learned about all of these studies and all of these things and like the outcomes of it, but never what went on and like the actual underlying methodology. And like, we talked about ethics with Zimbardo, but that's because we learned, hey, probably don't do this to your subjects or your participants. But I feel like there's so many psychology studies that are just not great. And they're used
absolutely
as a basis for everything.
It was interesting watching the documentary and like realizing that the people in the study were people, because I had like, you kind of forget that when you're reading it, which I think is one of the many like facets of that study.
Yeah.
But it was weird to just be like, yeah, no, like your entire experience before this study impacted how you acted in this study. Like what you thought going into it changed the entire study. So it's like flawed in so many ways because of human beings, just pretty much.
Human individuality, yeah.
Yeah, it was wild.
No. It was cool.
Very cool.
He's no longer with us. Not cool, but R.I.P. Zimbardo.
Yeah. I think going back to like the contributions or whatever, I think if you asked him his contributions, he'd be like, oh my goodness, they're so great. There's so many. But if you asked anyone else, you'd be like, hey, you need to be studied by a psychologist and like your reasonings need to be looked at because what the actual fuck.
Yeah.
Rest in peace.
R.I.P. I'm not speaking ill of the dead at all. At all.
Sorry. I was like, oh, he is actually deceased. That might be rude. But yeah, it was very interesting. So thank you for sharing that, Nicole. We'll have to do an episode like on him and his studies and like
at the same time, I think it'd be so cool to do it. At the same time, I'm just like, I don't want to give him the light of day. He had decades of fame. Decades. And like, we're just going to tell his story too. We got to tell the participant story.
We could do it where we like don't name it. And then at the end be like, guess who that was?
Drum roll, please. Behind door number 1.
Who is Zimbardo? That would be funny. Okay. Sick. Well, thank you both for sharing everything that you guys did. It was such a great episode. Our next episode is about the Gilgo Beach 4 and the Long Island serial killer who has been recently identified. So I'm really excited about that. I think we had done a little blurb about him in one of our like where we each bring a story. I don't remember which episode it was, but he hadn't been identified. It was the one we
did about 3 different unsolved cases.
Right.
So one of those ones.
It's kind of cool that it got solved.
Yeah, I know. Like I've been listening to, I always listen to a lot of Dateline. But like I've been listening to like their weekly meetings basically that they upload on Spotify, and they've been talking so much about the trial for this guy like for the past like year. And it's interesting to keep up on.
Yeah, that's really cool.
It's episode 23, Unsolved Serial Killers, September 16th, 2021. So that was like a while ago.
That's crazy. Oh my god.
And it was still under investigation when we recovered it.
Wild. Well, if you want a little bit of a teaser before this episode comes out, go listen to episode 23.
Don't mind the audio quality. We've worked on it.
Yeah,
it has improved since then.
There's been some improvements since.
Yes, very much so. And if you want to stay up to date on what we're doing, you can find us at Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok at What the Forensics. Our X is WT Forensics Pod. Our website is whattheforensics.ca, and our email is whattheforensics@gmail.com if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. This has been another episode of What the Forensics. We hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next time. Bye!
Bye! Bye.
Just a reminder to everyone that we are not professionals in the forensic science field. We are just interested in forensics and want to share what we are learning with our listeners. We're trying to give you the most accurate information, but we are human and can make mistakes. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you next week.